fine. How are you? Hello.
Hello, Hastings.
Hello.
Yes, Hastings. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad that you came to join us. Are you at Domazi?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm at Domas, but now I've moved to Lilongwe now.
Oh, you're in Lilongwe today?
Yes.
Okay, okay, no, that's
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
Hastings,
Yes.
how are you? Mutseki here.
Fine. Yes, Motsek. How are you?
I'm good, my brother.
Yes. Long time, man.
Yeah, long time, long time. How is my Malawi doing?
Yeah, Malawi is very well.
Yes. You just had an election and everything went well, I believe.
Yes, everything went on well.
No, congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you happy with the new leadership?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's your
So
choice.
far, so good. So
your
far, so
choice.
good. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Sure.
Yeah. That's great. No, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So we're looking forward.
Thank you.
When is the new cabinet coming in?
The new cabinet came out yesterday.
Oh, yesterday.
Yes.
So who's your new minister now?
Mr. Lowe.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, we need to reorientate the new minister to the SADC business. Eh?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. No, we wish him well.
Sure.
And we're looking forward to successful partnership with Malawi.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
ETC カードが導入されていません。
Where is the
Prof. It's me now who's getting tea, eh?
Oh, excellent. Very good, Mutseki. Very good. I've already had
because
my
Jim
tea.
is back, so Jim will keep you company.
I'm trying to figure out how to turn my video back on here.
Okay, let me turn it on for you.
Thanks.
Mr. Motseki, find in the chat the link for the Google Sites with the feed of this session, so everyone can share with the...
I see. Thank you, Elder. You are a star. Is it possible that it goes to the participants as well?
Jim, where are you?
I am just trying to sort out my video here. Yeah, I don't know what's. I'm on like this. I've only got this grid view, and I can't see any settings buttons.
Go to start video, Jim.
Start video. Yeah, I don't. All I've got is mute my audio, hide non-video participants, hide self view, add profile picture, rename. Don't know why that's the case.
Maybe Helder can help.
Let me see video.
No, you've turned it off.
Turn it off there, Jim.
Yeah, I don't know why this has happened. Maybe I should try. Oh, there we go. This is better. Got it. Cool.
There you are.
Yeah. Okay.
But you can don't forget to share them when we start.
Yeah, to share the screen.
Yeah.
There we go. Can you see it?
No.
No, not yet.
Yeah. It's coming.
Okay,
Yeah.
there it is.
Super.
Cool. Cool, cool, cool.
So we are about 12 minutes away.
Tom, how's the cold front there?
No, I was just telling the guys that we've got a warm afternoon here.
Nice.
There's no sign of it yet, but I believe it's going to come tomorrow.
Looks like a big one. Would have been a good time to be in Lesotho.
Sure. Not a good time to be in Lesotho. I think Lesotho will have quite a bit of snow.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And we are expecting 8-meter waves.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Nice. So you must get the surfboard out, huh?
Yeah.
Nice. Very, very cool. So that was Super Tubes back in its heyday.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Sure. How's your bike? Your e-bike?
It is the most wonderful thing that I've ever acquired in my whole life.
Really?
Yes, I will send you some video of it
Yeah, please.
next time when next I take it out.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So we're nearly ready. 8 minutes to go.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tight time-wise, but yeah, I did go this version. I've just hit a few slides so that it's nothing on yours, more on mine, the evaluation, because it was just going to be a bit long, I think.
Yeah, because there was a lot of repetition in there, so you can actually cut that out. You know, if we can just show and illustrate how each country was evaluated, then that will be fine. And then
and I think yeah, because the sort of we talk about the countries that are grouped in different categories and the sort of common constraints and interventions. I think that's cool. We don't need to recap on that again, like at the end. So yeah.
I see Eswatini has joined us.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Welcome, Pumzile. My colleague Panduleni just joined. And my friend from Madagascar, Tiana, welcome.
Excellent.
And your colleague Grant has just joined. And my colleague Deborah Catano also just joined. And there's a lady who worked with us on Aquatrans from Luana. She's now doing her PhD in the US, and she also just joined now. Edith, welcome, Edith.
Is it Edith?
Yeah, that's Edith.
Very nice, wonderful. Welcome, Edith.
And John Fort, my colleague from Cape Town. John, welcome.
Yeah, so the room is filling in slowly, eh?
Wonderful.
Yes, Dr. Madala, did you see the link?
Yes, you know, I'm using my tablet and with it, I'm not using it for WhatsApp or anything. But can you send it to me through WhatsApp, my WhatsApp number, so that I can share it with my groups?
Okay.
Yeah, I've already shared the advert with the webinar link, but then if I also send the YouTube link, will be great as well.
Okay, I'm gonna copy it and send it through your email.
Can you do it? Okay, through email. Yeah, that's still fine.
Okay.
Nazar, can you turn on your video?
Sorry. You know, I was.
There you are.
In another. Yes, I was in another Zoom meeting. We are fighting with IFAD to get some money.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. In Swahili we say Mzee Tom.
Yeah.
You know, Mzee is Madala,
eh? Yeah, it happens. Yeah. I enjoyed the webinar yesterday. It was very good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've actually got an email that I want to send you. So I will send it to you after this webinar.
Okay. And then I'm still working on there's a question which was raised by James, I think, on the the specifics of the concentration of fish farms.
Yes.
Yeah, we have some data which is being processed, so at least we can get an idea of where we have a concentration of farms. It may not be very specific on commercial, but yeah, for Tanzania, commercial fish farming is more concentrated in Lake Victoria, around the Lake Victoria with the caging. Yeah.
No, I think that's perfect. We're not looking for something that's very high resolution, but just to kind of give us an overview of if there are any commercial pond farming activities, where those are.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks very much for that. But your other info was great. We put that into the report, so that's fantastic.
Okay, cheers. It's a good start. This year we're looking forward to have a much more better data, because we did collect for last year, and this year we are going for another run.
Yeah, it was good news to hear that you guys are ready to welcome the private sector investors for aquaculture.
Yes.
Yeah,
we are indeed.
A lot of potential.
Yes, there is a lot of unexplored potential.
Okay. Colleagues, it's 14 hours on the dot, Central African time. For Dr. Madala, it's 15 hours on the dot, East African time.
Indeed.
Yes, and I see the room is filling up. Thanks to everyone for making time to attend this webinar. I've recognized so many colleagues. Asanda, I said my colleague Deborah, Professor Kaunda, Etienne, our regional webinar expert. Grant has joined, John has joined, Mr. Mori from Mauritius, Rachel Mullins joined, Stan Alexander also joined, Sloans has joined, Blessings joined. I'm sure we can start. Other people will find us on the way. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you all to our first webinar in the SADC Aquaculture webinar series. In this current context of COVID-19 pandemic, I think we all are aware that this pandemic has really caused either immediate and devastating consequences in most of our countries in the SADC region. And as it started, if you remember, several countries recommended measures, including border closures, social distancing, lockdowns, you name it, just to halt the spread of the pandemic. But in other countries, it's getting out of hand because some of this have been relaxed. So it's like we are going around in a vicious cycle. But what is more important to note is that it has had serious consequences to fish and seafood trade, especially products which are destined to the food industry. And I think a lot of experts are also predicting that the future consequences will be far-reaching. And disruptions in fish and seafood supply chain, declining production, as well as declining consumer demand, all of these things are pushing prices up for both fish and aquatic food. Now, what we are to expect, as it has been seen in other sectors, is that more and more people are going to lose their jobs, especially in developing countries, in the SADC region specifically. But it is interesting if you read a lot of write-ups that aquaculture stands a chance in weathering this storm. I'm not sure to what extent. But having said that, I wish to welcome everybody, and I would like to introduce my panel. We have the chair of the SADC Aquaculture Working Group, Dr. Nazal Madala, who will be the moderator, as well as the team that will be giving presentation and being panelists, Professor Tom Hepp and James McCafferty. So I want to hand over to Dr. Nazal, but before I do that, I would like to thank our partners, Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, Mozambique. They've been a pillar of strength and support to the SADC Fisheries Program, and we really appreciate their support. They have set up this system for us, and also the YouTube channel that they have set. The link has been shared. House rules: if anybody has a question, you can start raising your questions as we go. There's a Q&A section at the bottom. You can start sending your questions through. But also, there's also a chat block where you can also send some remarks, etc., your greetings, so that we know who's in the house. At the end of the presentation, we will also be giving people a chance to raise some of the questions they have. Next to your name, you'll find a place where you can click and raise your hand, and make sure that after you've been recognized, you lower your hand so that we don't create a confusion unnecessarily. So we'd like to hand over to the moderator of this session, Dr. Madala. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Moseki. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you to first of this series of webinars. And in particular, I'd like to appreciate you setting time aside to participate in this important event. And in particular, the fact that we are trying to beat the COVID, that regardless of the lockdowns and the challenges we have with the COVID, but we are yet able to meet and discuss issues critical to development of our aquaculture industry in the region. Perhaps without wasting much time, I would like to welcome our presenters to this webinar to introduce themselves, and then after that we'll allow them to take us through their presentation. So maybe if I start with Tom.
Yes, thank you, Nazel. Who am I? I was a professor at Rhodes University for very many years, and then decided to go consulting, and I'm still doing that in the later years of my life. And COVID has certainly had an impact on this latter part of my life, and I don't like it very much. But be that as it may, we have had a wonderful opportunity to look at the value chains, the aquaculture value chains within SADC. And my team consists of Jim McCafferty, who is on the panel today, and Grant Merrick, another of my colleagues from Advanced Africa, and Rachel Mullins. All of them have the right qualifications and background and experience to have participated in this very interesting exercise. So without further ado, we've got quite a thing to go through here, because this project, it deals with first of all, it gives an overview of what aquaculture is about in SADC at the moment. And then it provides country profiles. And this is what we'll be doing today. The second webinar in this series of 3 will be an analysis of the value chains and looking at some of the opportunities that present themselves through the value chains. And then the third webinar of this series, of this trilogy, is a webinar looking at the development of a roadmap for the future development of the industry, which, as I said, is based on the foundational work, with other words, profiling the countries, and then secondly, profiling the value chains, and from there we go on into developing a roadmap to achieve the vision that we have set ourselves. So without further ado, Jim, you can perhaps go to the second slide. And this is very important, particularly under COVID. I would really like to thank everybody who has participated in this exercise. And all the country focal points and their associates and their colleagues who came in from the beginning and really provided us with excellent information. just as an aside, as far as the information is concerned, you will note that we will be presenting certain figures. These figures are based on the aquaculture, on production in aquaculture in various countries. And where information was not available, we used the published information from FAO. But we paid particular attention to get the information, the direct information from the various countries. Then, of course, there's the SADC Secretariat, Motseki and Calisius, who were stalwarts in driving this particular initiative from the Secretariat. Our sub-consultants, Emmanuel, who is here today, and Peter Brits, I don't know whether he's in the room, and Sloane's Chimatiru, who is also in the room. Sloane's is not from MAP, Sloane's is from Watapa, sorry, Sloane's. And then, of course, we would not have been able to do this work under COVID if we didn't have a very, very, very active and very large aquaculture network throughout SADC, comprising academics, government scientists, administrators, processors, producers, farmers, service providers, feed producers, large and small, as well as very many NGOs who provided information for us to complete this under the difficult COVID time, which, as you will realize, put our travel plans to ground truth the various data and informations. Well, the COVID put paid to that. We were not able to travel. The next slide, please, Jim. So what we'll be doing today is I'll be dealing with part one, which is the state of play, current state of play of aquaculture in SADC. I'll run through it quite rapidly, and then I will pass on to Jim, who will be looking at the various country profiles. Next, Jim. Yeah, just as a bit of a background, we have a 3-column table here which looks at the global situation, the sub-Saharan situation, and SADC situation in particular on far right-hand side. We will note that if we look at the aquaculture growth rates, that the aquaculture growth rate in SADC is about 8.7% year on year, and which is pretty good. Not as good as sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, but certainly bigger than what the current growth rate is globally. SADC makes out a very small proportion of aquaculture production if we're looking at food fish. As a percent of the global value, we're looking at around about 0.1%, but don't be fooled, that 0.1% plays a big role in our region. Also, we shouldn't be put off by that very low figure. There are very many countries or very many regions which are also producing in the region of what SADC region is producing. The main reason why most of these country or regional contributions are rather small is simply because of the huge volume that is produced by China. Inland aquaculture makes up the bulk of aquaculture production in SADC, about 87%. And of that, finfish makes up around about 99%. If we look at it, freshwater finfish makes up about 99% of that. Marine aquaculture, on the other hand, is not as big as freshwater aquaculture, but it is growing, and the potential throughout the region by coastal states and small island states is being recognized, and there are amazing developments that are taking place in coastal and marine aquaculture. Currently, it's mainly mollusks that are of importance. And then, of course, the crustaceans are extremely important. With other words, we're basically talking prawns or shrimps. And then marine finfish at this stage of the game except for Mauritius, is in what I would call a nascent state. It's getting there, and it will certainly develop, but Mauritius at the moment is certainly the leader in terms of marine fish farming. Then, of course, seaweeds. At the moment, total production is around about 111,000 tonne. I'm talking wet weight, and comprised mainly of the production from Zanzibar, from Madagascar, and then Tanzania mainland. Production was higher than, it at one stage went up to around about 132,000 tonne, but there have been problems with rising sea surface temperatures and the industry beginning to move offshore in using different technologies. Next slide, please, Jim. I don't want to spend much time on this, but here we're looking at fish consumption in the region. Globally, it's around about 20.5, sub-Saharan around about 8.9%. And on the next slide, we see SADC, which is in the region of around about 11.3 kgs, which is below the global average. But that 11.3 kgs, don't be fooled by it. That 11.3 kgs is actually a consequence of the very high consumption rates in the island states and some of the coastal states. If we look at the non-coastal states, then obviously the picture looks slightly different and not as rosy as 11.3 kgs. Thank you, Jim. Now, with the current fisheries that are fisheries landings and the population increase, there is within the sub-Saharan region, there is an expected downturn in terms of consumption to around about 8 kgs in 2030. And if one looks at the bigger picture, if you have a look at that map, there are certain alarm bells for the SADC region. And if we have a look at that, we see the countries where there is a great predicted deficit, in other words, DRC, Angola, Mozambique, followed by South Africa, Tanzania, Malawi, and all the way through to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe and Eswatini, there is, put it this way, the people in Zimbabwe, they eat nyama, and inhlanzi is not consumed in such great quantities as, say, for example, in Zambia or Malawi. But the 570,000 tons shortfall by around about mid-2020s is a serious number that was generated by FAO. And through an examination of the value chains, we have been able to predict what the production could be in around about 2030, but that will come in later webinars. Thank you, Jim. Aquaculture in SADC. Many SADC states have abundant natural resources, however, we've got to understand that the full potential of aquaculture has not been realized, not by far means, but certainly the developments that and the initiatives that are taking place, as we heard yesterday in the webinar run by Etienne, that Tanzania is Tanzania is right there, and it is making great strides. And similarly, if we look at the situation in Zambia, within a decade, what has happened in Zambia is truly remarkable. The potential in very many other countries exists. That same kind of potential exists in very many other countries. And quite frankly, there's sufficient information that we have obtained from various member states suggesting that this trend will continue and will also be seen in very many other countries. There are challenges, of course. These are mainly institutional inputs, scientific, human capital, market, and financial. But these we'll be discussing these in greater detail in the other webinars. Aquaculture within SADC, it's dichotomous. It's divided into smallholder, what I call smallholder, and commercial aquaculture. In a nutshell, smallholder aquaculture at this stage of the game does not provide or does not reduce poverty, in my view. It does not improve national food security, but if it is undertaken successfully, it contributes to food security at the household level. But let me make it quite clear. I think that this is one particular sector that really needs support in terms of financial support and input support, because it has potential to go places if a proportion of current smallholder farms are transformed into small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises. And we do believe that this is possible. Next slide, please, Jim. Yeah, the commercial aquaculture is, of course, private sector, market-led, investment-orientated developments, where not only companies have invested, but there are very many companies that are established based on shareholding, and where people have actually bought into the development of aquaculture, and certainly they are getting good returns. It operates at scale, advanced technologies. Many are vertically integrated along the value chain. From, say, for example, having their own hatcheries, from having their own in-house services, in-house service providers, in-house feed supply, in-house processing, in-house canning, and in-house exporting. A good example of that is, of course, the abalone industry in South Africa. Jim, next one, please. Yeah, if we have a look at the numbers quickly, in SADC 2018, we're looking at in the region of around about 94, call it 95,000 tons of fish that has been produced. This is increasing, as I said, at around about 8.7% per annum. And we see that round about, call it close on 80% is produced by commercial operations, and the rest by smaller operations. On the graph in the center, what I've shown there is basically the production and then farm gate value of the various sectors. And of course, freshwater fish far exceeds the others. And of course, what is interesting, if we have a look at abalone, which is the smallest production in terms of volume, but certainly when it gets to value, then of course the picture changes. The graph on the right-hand side illustrates what I mentioned earlier about seaweed, and that's a consequence of higher sea surface temperatures. And changes in technology are required there, and these changes are already taking place quite rapidly. The next one, Jim. Yeah, you will note that we have obtained most of the information that we're talking about here from our country focal points and from our colleagues that are farmers and producers in very many of the countries, such that we feel quite comfortable with the numbers that we have presented, and also the numbers that we have used in terms of the analysis of the value chain. There are several clusters that we have identified, and it's those clusters that we have focused on in our value chain analysis further down the line. Tilapia value chain is dominated by Zambia, Zim, URT, and Malawi. Rainbow trout dominated by Lesotho and South Africa. And marine finfish, as I said, the only noteworthy production at the moment is in Mauritius, although there are advances made in South Africa, in Tanzania, in Kenya. Whoops, that's not SADC, but they're also making good advances in marine fish farming. Prawns dominated by Madagascar, followed by Tanzania. And I would put it in this way, I think it's recovering in Mozambique at this stage of the game. And we hope that we will soon see the industry in Mozambique back up on its feet after the white spot virus disease, which really had a devastating effect on the industry there. Bivalves, we've had to divide the bivalves into two value chains. The one is for food, and that's mussels and oysters, South Africa and Namibia, and then bivalves for jewelry. And here we're talking about the Seychelles and the Tanzanian, or rather in Zanzibar, the pearl industry. In Seychelles, it's production of round, full, round black pearls, and in other countries, at this stage of the game, the pearl production is restricted to half shells, or rather half shell pearls, not as valuable as the full round pearls. Abalone, we have the value chain is rather the abalone cluster is basically South Africa and Namibia, and the seaweed cluster, URT, mainly Zanzibar, followed by Madagascar. Jim? I don't think it's necessary for me to go through the various systems. I think we all know what systems are being used. Freshwater fish, basically ponds and cages, and marine fish, basically cages. And in South Africa, a lot of work being done in recirculating aquaculture systems. Thanks, Jim. Crustaceans, there again, mainly in ponds. There are some small volumes of crabs that are being fattened. There's a problem with Scylla serrata. It is not as easily to produce the crablets of Scylla serrata as it is with the species in Vietnam, and hence crab farming in our region has sort of lagged behind. Bivalves, well, that's mainly rope and rope culture, and as far as pearls are concerned, yeah, also rope culture and submerged frame culture. Submerged frame, you can go to the next slide, Jim. Submerged frame culture is a new technology that has been developed in Seychelles. And the reason why they moved away from long lines is simply because of theft and vandalism, where people are jealous of the pearls and wanted to steal them. And then the producers decided, well, if that's the case, then we'll grow the pearls around about 8 or 9 meters under the water. And they're actually getting a better product than on the long lines. Abalone, land-based flow-through systems and ranching, which is quite an interesting way of producing abalone. And seaweed, we're basically talking about Euchemia and Capophycus, yeah, using off-bottom methods, but recently moved to submerged raft methods in deeper waters to counteract impacts of climate change, as I mentioned earlier. Jim? Yeah, I think as far as the summary is concerned, yeah, there's been some significant developments over the last 20 years. There's an interesting range of candidate species and production systems we feel that the interventionist approaches at the smallholder level has rather failed, and the transformation of these smallholder farms to SMMEs, I think, is a crucial issue that needs to be addressed. Growth has really been in the market-led commercial aquaculture section. There is clearly an increasing demand for fish, coupled with the stagnant or declining supply of capture fisheries. So there is significant potential for growth of fish farming or fish production in SADC, but this needs to be tempered by certain market limitations that will be discussed I think, in the following webinar. Jimbo, thank you. Yeah, I think what we've tried to do with this particular work, and particularly with the final webinar, we have tried to develop the value chains, or rather think about the development of value chains within the concept of the RASAP 2016 to 2026. And where all priority actions have actually been addressed. You will note that all the 4 priority actions have been addressed in the next series of webinars. So without further ado, that sort of gives us a background, and I'd like to ask Jim if he can continue to deal with the country profiles and how we have looked at country profiling. Dr. Madala, is that cool if Jim takes over, or do you want to stop here for a while or whatever?
I think Jim should take over.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes. Yeah, you're welcome, Jim. Floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. So building on that that background and state of play to aquaculture that Tom took us through now, just to give you guys an idea of the aim and objectives of the project. The project itself kind of arose out of the RASAP, this focus on value chains. You'll see that it's quite a multifaceted project with country profiles and value chains, detailed value chain analyses, prices, but also looking more broadly at interventions and constraints. All of this sort of funneled towards the priority action roadmap, which we have developed and which will be discussed, I think, in webinar 3. But just to give you an idea of how we did this, we did desktop studies of all the SADC member states. We engaged with CFPs. We looked in the literature for any data that we could find on production activities, value chain information, prices, markets, human capacity information, and any work done on the impacts of climate change on aquaculture. And obviously, as Prof mentioned at the beginning, we had quite comprehensive fieldwork planned for the study, but due to COVID, we weren't able to do that. But luckily, in this day and age, one can use other platforms for getting this information. So we were able to get the information from our CFPs and other value chain actors, farmers, traders, and so on. So the country profiles themselves, we compiled them for each state. They were composed of a few different components, biophysical potential, things like the value chains, existing value chains, the public sector environment, including institutional and regulatory factors, impacts to aquaculture growth from imports, which we know is quite an important one in SADC, and capture fisheries, things like climate change, and then also social and economic dynamics, women and youth. And then we took this information and used it to identify interventions at a country level that were required to develop aquaculture. To do this, we used what we call the SADC country evaluation tool. The tool essentially assesses each country's readiness to commence with sustainable aquaculture sector development. And it it's comprised of two major components, the tool. One of them is industry attractiveness. So this is how attractive an industry appears to an investor versus alternatives when considering issues like risk, governance, level of development, and economic potential, which refers to the future profitability offered by a particular investment within the selected industry based on issues that confer strategic advantage. And the tool itself comprises 20 indicators, 10 for each factor. So this just gives you an idea. That's the matrix. And you'll see the different axes, and these are the different indicators that were scored from 0 to 2, with 2 representing the optimal score. The results from our evaluations, I'm going to break it down on a country basis. In terms of those countries that were pre-investment categorized, this was Botswana and Comoros. This was due to the fact that, based on our evaluation, the sector has not adequately developed to the place where it could receive private sector investment. There's a number of common constraints, one of which is there's actually inadequate knowledge about where one could actually farm fish in Botswana. And similarly in Comoros, I think the last scoping study was 2007, but there hasn't been information out there which people can access to get an idea of the opportunities for aquaculture investment. And that was something we identified as quite an important intervention, was to identify suitable sites for aquaculture and other things like improving research capacity as well as market studies. I think a major limitation is the fact that often we don't know exactly how big the market is for aquaculture products. So that was something that we identified as an intervention for aquaculture development in Botswana and Comoros. Pilot project countries was Eswatini. They've made good progress in the fact that they've got a policy, they've got an aquaculture and fisheries bill. Biophysically, they don't have that much potential. It's a small country, but that being said, there are commercial opportunities, I think particularly in the water storage reservoirs. But unfortunately, no one really knows about these opportunities. There haven't been any pilot projects, no feasibility studies. So until such a stage as those happen, then it's unlikely that investment will happen in Eswatini. The developmental countries, yeah, there were quite a few. So we had Angola, DRC, Malawi, Seychelles, Tanzania, and Zim. These development countries are in a state where capital can be deployed to expand the sector. These countries have favorable environmental conditions and favorable aquaculture candidate species. And the public sector has established a platform to facilitate investment. Without going into the constraints for each country, like I mentioned before, I think the aquaculture opportunity hasn't really been marketed very effectively. So despite the fact that there are significant water resources and suitable candidate species, there's a lack of knowledge about what the opportunity is for the private sector. Other things include lack of fiscal incentives. Another one that's come up a lot is a licensing process, which is often presents significant hurdles for people trying to enter the industry. It's either unclear, inefficient. So I think one of the interventions we identified there was to simplify that process, looking at things like one-stop shops, and also further market studies and marketing the opportunity to private sector investors. The early mover countries was just the one, it was Lesotho. This is a case where the development that's happened on Katsi Dam, the two commercial operators that have established there, they entered the sector without an established public sector development platform. So at the moment, there isn't comprehensive policy or regulations in Lesotho. But nonetheless, the opportunity was identified by the private sector and they moved in there. But to expand aquaculture in Lesotho might require more work on identifying where else aquaculture could take place outside of the LHWP. And there's also just a general lack of human capacity in Lesotho for aquaculture. Our two cautious expansion countries were Mozambique and Namibia. In these countries, the public sector platform is fairly well established, and common constraints to both of these countries, lack of investment incentives. I think the macroeconomic environment in Mozambique is also challenging. And again, there's a lack of knowledge on the market opportunities for aquaculture in these countries. I think in Namibia, we know that one of the biggest issues is shellfish certification. And this kind of limits Namibia's markets to one high-value Pacific oyster market in Asia, and other than that, domestic markets. So that certification could really open up opportunities for Namibia, but at the moment, that hasn't been forthcoming. Finally, we've got our expansionary countries. This included Zambia, Madagascar, Mauritius, and South Africa. These countries are characterized by high sector development and very good economic opportunity. And in these countries, there's a very good public sector platform to enable private sector investment. There's a few common constraints to these. I think chatting to guys in Zambia, I think there's a bit of a lack of public sector coordination between different departments, and other things like legislative and regulatory. I think particularly in Madagascar, undeveloped markets and brands, R&D, biosecurity, other issues. A good one being the prawn industry in Madagascar. And again, complex and onerous license application procedures for entering the aquaculture industry here. So some of the interventions we recommended include harmonizing legislation, and also ensuring that aquaculture is adequately considered in general governance development frameworks. And in summary, the interesting thing that came out of the work was that I think historically it's always thought that the SADC states have a long way to go in terms of attracting investment, but I think our evaluation showed that there's 13 of the states have actually established platforms by which to realize private sector investment. And that shows that the efforts that have been made have been successful, but there still are interventions that are required both at a regional level and at a country level. Just to conclude on the aquaculture status and potential, we've touched on how SADC is well endowed with extensive water resources, very favorable candidate species. In the case of your trouts, that's typically, well, they're relegated to countries like South Africa and Lesotho with cooler climes and high altitude areas. So the potential for them is far more limited than your warm water fishes. In terms of the market, we know that tilapia can penetrate low, middle, and high income markets, whereas your rainbow trout has a much smaller high income market segment. In general, interventions for the freshwater aquaculture sector in SADC should focus on increasing production of tilapia, enhancing the salmon rainbow trout value chain, so trying to open up export markets, and then potentially exploring the potential for catfish production. And it might be a good question to say, what can we take from Nigeria, and can we apply that in the SADC region? Mariculture, the potential varies a lot across the region. So on the west coast, you've got excellent conditions for mussels and oysters, but there are constraints from things like algal blooms. In terms of cage culture, in South Africa, it's limited by the number of suitable embayments to areas like Saldanha, Algoa Bay, Mossel Bay, Richards Bay, but even so, there's been quite a lot of social opposition to these developments. In the West Indian Ocean region, a large number of very favorable candidate species, high value species like snappers and groupers, and pristine water conditions to produce these. But as Prof mentioned, the marine finfish aquaculture sector is still quite nascent in the region. I think in the short to medium term, the growth opportunities are limited to the proven species, so abalone, to some extent, mussels, oysters, prawns, and seaweeds. And in the medium to long term, marine finfish will present a significant opportunity. In terms of the value chains, for abalone to grow will probably take some marketing efforts to diversify their markets, which is currently limited to largely a single market, which places them at risk to various market externalities. Mussels and oysters, without certification, they're not able to expand into the EU. Prawns, positive news is that it seems to be rebounding. And seaweed, like Prof mentioned, given climate change impacts over the last few years, production has stagnated to some extent, but there is ongoing R&D into moving seaweed culture into deeper water culture and moving from cheaper denticulatum to the higher value Capophycus. And in the medium to long term, yes, like I said, marine finfish is a significant opportunity, and we've got countries like Seychelles and Mauritius, which are highly favorable for producing high value species. We know that there's well-established export markets, but there still needs to be R&D to encourage private sector investment. To conclude, I think, like I said, most of the member states have created enabling environments for investment. So I think those opportunities are there, but the next step is to try and attract and facilitate investment from the private sector. And this, one of the conclusions we drew was that there is economic opportunity, but this has not been marketed and promoted on a regional basis. There's been no integrated drive to market the SADC region as an aquaculture destination. As I mentioned earlier, there's still questions regarding the aquaculture potential in some member states. Information on investment, approvals, ownership is highly disjunct. In some instances, there aren't pilot projects to demonstrate the business case for commercial aquaculture. And finally, you cannot market that which are known or develop frameworks for sector development when you don't have an idea exactly of what potential you have. So in summary, there's a need to develop a coordinated regional approach to facilitate investment. This might be developing marketing materials, embarking on roadshows, websites, and making documentation freely available to would-be investors. And this has to be facilitated by the public sector. Once that human capacity is developed and inputs are developed, things will just develop organically from the establishment of commercial operations once they have been encouraged to invest into the sector. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, I think in the meantime, you can have a sip of a glass of water for presenters as we work out modalities for comments and questions. Maybe if we can be able to open up to any general comments, and then thereafter we can proceed to questions as you take a sip of water. Any show of hands? Chamba, can you help us to link in participants who have comments? Chamba, over. Okay, I'm just trying to find a way of bringing in the people with the questions so we can.
I'll do that, no problem.
Okay, I'm seeing Etienne's hand. If you can allow him.
Hi, hi everybody.
Hello.
Nice to be sitting in this meeting. Tom, maybe your views. We get over bureaucratized, if there's a word like that, in some instances where private sector investors want to push ahead and they find themselves come up against a system that, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the system is from a governance point of view sometimes not ready to cope with large private sector investment in aquaculture, and it often scares an investor away. And there's plenty of examples of that, which I don't think we need to go into. But we have to find this very fine balance between making sure that the regulation of the sector is right and working, and also making sure that it actually does work for an investor. And maybe just your views on how one achieves that. Thanks.
Thank you, Etienne. Tom?
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Etienne. You know, to a very large extent, I could use Seychelles as an example, where we've been doing a lot of work to try and establish an industry. Whereas previously it was just about impossible to get through all the various different bits and pieces of regulation in order to get to some sort of finality in terms of allocation of rights, let alone getting to the point of allocating a license. Put it this way, it takes a huge amount of work and dedicated work within the various government departments, but particularly by the lead agency that needs to investigate how its system is at the, or what that system comprises at the moment, and then to really put in effort to demonstrate to the bureaucrats the benefits of having a simpler system for all concerned. And unless you can do that, then you've basically lost the game. I agree with you that it needs to be simplified. It can be simplified. And but at the same time, one of the big things that needs to be brought into the equation here is that very often aquaculture is seen as some or other black cloud that is a dangerous thing about to happen. Yet if, say, for example, I wish to farm with goats in the Karoo or with cattle somewhere else, I can start a farm. Yes, I would have to do an environmental impact assessment, which is good. But the bureaucratic hindrances are so much less in agriculture and so much more in aquaculture. And these issues need to be addressed by the competent authorities. It's a lot of work that has to be done. It seems to me like, as Dr. Madala was telling us yesterday, is that Tanzania now has also got it right. And that also, I'm sure, the doc will tell us that it's not something that you can change overnight. It takes a big lot of effort.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, then we are seeing other hands. Am I seeing Eduardo? If we can be able to get the one who has raised hands to speak. I also see Pumzile.
I've done it for Pumzile. Mr. Pumzile can talk now.
Madam Pumzile.
Thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hello, good to see
thank
you. You're
and,
welcome.
And good afternoon to everyone. Mine is just, yes, mine is just to add on what James was presenting about on country profiling. In Eswatini, he mentioned that we still have a fisheries and aquaculture bill, but now it has been passed to an act. I'm just adding on that. And the other thing is that we do have an aquaculture strategy that has been developed.
Thank you, Pumzile. Yeah, we'll certainly include that. It was, I'm glad we finally got that answer, because all the information I had was that the bill hadn't been implemented yet. So that's good news.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so we get another participant whose hand is up. Is it Eduardo now?
Mori.
Can you let? Yeah, you're welcome, Eduardo.
It's Mori.
Yeah, I don't know whether Eduardo comes first. Okay. Hi, it's Mori. If you allow me.
Yes, you're allowed, madam.
Yeah, let me thank the presenters. It has been a high-level presentation, both presenters. But my question goes to James McCarthy. Sorry if I misspell the name. No. I have seen Mauritius being grouped under the expansionary module with other countries. That's interesting in terms of the economic versus the sector attractiveness in terms of its correlation. But I want to be guided. Why is it that there has not been spelled out a bit of this pollution effect, and then there is a cautious zone for certain countries also in aquaculture? I think this is very important to be spelled out, especially if we need to ensure sustainability and also having a kind of harmony with other developmental patterns within the setup of the blue economy in each of the region. If aquaculture, marine aquaculture per se is to be developed. I just want to comment on that, why this needs to be spelled out. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Maury. I think just to add to that, I know, Tom, you were in Mauritius quite recently. And I think, yeah, I don't know if mariculture had an interesting beginning, but things are looking very good there now, particularly with this move to more open ocean aquaculture.
Yes, aquaculture, obviously, it's if I can just chip in, it is something that obviously needs to be developed in concert with other industries, with other activities, and obviously needs to fall within the social fabric of what people expect. And you know, when it started, when FFM started, it sort of fell outside of the norms of what coastal communities had in mind for the Marburg Lagoon. But slowly it is being accepted, and certainly you know, if you have a look at the supply of fish in Mauritius, in terms of the artisanal fisheries, these are going down rapidly, and we cannot also sort of have a situation where fishery is just allowed to expand within the lagoon. That's why government is trying to get the guys out of the lagoon. It's a difficult thing. But nevertheless, in terms of aquaculture in Mauritius, the idea of going offshore is a good one, and it will certainly pay dividends as I see it going forward.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring in Blessings. Blessing, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the presenters, and my question is directed to James. Just taking from you one of your conclusions where you said there is need to develop a coordinated approach to facilitating investment in aquaculture, giving examples of marketing materials, investor roadshows, websites, and user-friendly documentation. I'm assuming though that this approach you're referring to is at country level. I don't know whether it's also possible at a regional level, but if it's a country level, I wanted to ask, is there a test case in one of the SADC countries where we can, all the countries can learn from, where this approach was taken and was initiated successfully? Maybe it could be something practical that can be shared. Their marketing materials, how they conducted their roadshows, the setup of their websites, and documentation that they have, which you can be able to learn from practically, or it's something that is an approach that is new that has to be developed and the countries start running with them, or there's a test case in one of the countries. That was my question to James, or maybe to panelists.
Thank you. Just on the first aspect of the question, I think on a regional level, there are opportunities for SADC to also market something. I mean, you could have something like SADC branding. So I think there are opportunities both at a country and a regional level. In terms of examples of where this has happened, yeah, I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit. I know that Seychelles is kind of very much on that path. You know, aquaculture is still nascent there, but they've gone about everything in a very meticulous manner in terms of developing software and marketing materials and engaging with investors. So that might be a good case. Otherwise, I think, yeah, it's sort of always been a case of the commercial guys getting stuck in and doing their thing on, you know, sort of stop-start manner. Tom, I don't know if you've got any other examples.
No, I think it should be. It is something that should be supported by the region in order to ensure that aquaculture will actually meet the requirements of fish deficit. Number one, and number two, it should also be supported by SADC region in order to achieve the economic goals that the sector can achieve. So I think it's there is definitely a huge room for SADC to as a whole, for the region to play a role in marketing and expanding aquaculture within the region and within the various member states. I don't know whether Motseki could perhaps add something here.
Oh, looks like Moseki is not in. Should we bring Vasco Schmidt?
Yeah. Be interesting to hear what Vasco has to say.
Vasco is in, but his mic. Okay, now Vasco, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I joined this meeting a bit late. My apologies. And well, it's very good to be with you in this great initiative. And I would like to commend Prof and Jim and also Grant who were involved in this interesting work. I have one question which relates to best practice management guidelines for aquaculture, which were developed and approved. We went through a process. We also were part of it. We assisted the SADC secretariat also together with Prof, who was the one who led the expert job, and we developed. So these guidelines were approved in June 2019, I think, by the ministers, and we went subsequently through a process of developing a tool to monitor these guidelines. And I would be interested to hear from Prof and whether the outcome of the evaluation we came out with using the tool to monitor the implementation of best practice management in the SADC. Because we use different parameters then, but I would be interested to hear if in this country profiling if there is some similarity between these two maps. They look quite similar, but of course the parameters were a bit different.
Oh, thank you. Okay, responses.
Jim, you want to respond to that?
No, I think, I'd just like to thank Vasco, and I think, that initiative was a very good one. And just to comment on the methodology with the matrix, it is quite similar. We find that it's a very good way to quite rapidly get a good feel on the status of aquaculture, or with the BMPs, the status of implementation. As far as those have been implemented, I'm not sure, but Tom, do you have anything further to add on the BPAMs that we worked on?
No, I think what is nice is that some countries have at least taken the initiative and have taken it further to develop their own biosecurity measures. There was just a question that was raised by Annabella from Mozambique, which mentions the same issue, is that in these presentations we did not talk about impacts and risks. Annabella, just to while you're there, and then everybody can hear as well, instead of me writing a reply to you, the issues of risks and environmental impacts are dealt with the particular value chains, and that will be dealt with in the following webinar in quite some detail. So we certainly deal with issues of environmental risk and environmental impacts, and I recognize that yes, indeed, there have been some serious incidents in Mozambique, particularly with lake virus, tilapia lake virus, and selling the fingerlings and the impacts of that. But these are issues that will be dealt in the value chain webinar in the following one.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hand. Moseki. If you have anything, Moseki.
Where is Moseki?
Dr. Madala.
Yes.
Yes, I'm on and off. I don't know what's wrong with my connection.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I said, okay, if you have anything, because you've been quiet for some time. Maybe it's nice if you have an opportunity to say anything, to comment anything before we invite somebody else.
No, so far all is well.
Okay, maybe if we can get comment. I'm just looking at our participants. I'm seeing we have Sloans. If we can chip in, if there's anything to comment. Sloans.
I think the microphone is off.
His microphone is muted. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Get you loud and clear, brother. You're welcome.
Well, I don't have much to say, just to thank Prof and Jim for a fantastic presentation. But maybe something that I want to add is to just, commending SADC Secretariat for actually doing this, because as you heard from the presentation by Prof, I think what is going to be really important is to look at SADC as a block of a market, and therefore this study, goes a long way towards beginning to open that process of actually looking at SADC as one block of a market, which I think is critically important, especially now that countries are developing their individual aquaculture industries, but often I think they struggle to understand what are the opportunities to either get inputs or to access output markets within the region. So I think this is critically important. The second bit is, I hope maybe as we go to the next webinar, is really to focus on market access and the kind of instruments that we need to understand for countries to be able to access the markets, particularly crossing over into the trade instruments, which unfortunately they are managed through a different unit or department at the SADC Secretariat. But I think this would be extremely important to look at, so that people can have a comprehensive understanding of both the production, but also the markets in the future. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say as a comment. But otherwise, this has been really a fantastic webinar. Thank you, Prof. and Jim, for a fantastic work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sloans. Just wondering if we have any more comments from our participants. I don't see any hands being raised now.
Can I just sort of mention something?
Yes, Tom, the floor is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sloans, for that comment. I think that's an extremely valuable observation that you made there, which, whether it was the entire issue of regarding SADC as a block and a block market, which will come through quite clearly in the following webinar. When you analyze the value chains and look at the mass flow of each particular value chain, you will see how it crosses the borders, and hence that whole block concept is an extremely important one, because if one just sort of regards the value chains on a country basis, then there is no way that aquaculture can grow as it would if one looks at it as a block. So yeah, that whole block concept in terms of the markets is critical for the expansion of aquaculture within that SADC block. It's very, yeah. Thank you very much for that comment, Lance.
Thank you, Tom. I'm trying to Motseki, if you have.
Thank you, moderator. I think I don't see any other questions, unless if you are seeing any. But there's one thing I want to highlight, following up on the discussions. And if Etienne is still in the house, maybe he can also chip in. I think going forward, following on the discussions that, especially on sustainability issues, there is a need to go back to the drawing boards. As a region, we had focused on environmental management for aquaculture development. And I think that's the work that we did with Etienne together with AU IBA. And I think linked with the current best practices, best management practices for aquaculture in SADC that we worked with FAO and Advance Africa. I think it's about time now that member states going back to their drawing boards, planning and implementation. This needs to be worked into their planning processes to ensure that expansion and development has an element of sustainability.
Yeah.
So I think maybe through African aquaculture magazines webinars, we need to have a session to promote environmental management for aquaculture, as well as further promote how countries could adopt and also domesticate some of the regional instruments that promote sustainability in their national work.
Thanks, Motseki. You've said I must chip in. I don't really have much to add, except that I agree. We've got an exciting lineup of talks across the continent for the next couple of months, and there's certainly space to have a very in-depth discussion around the adoption of sustainability measures, but not only the adoption of it, the actual putting it into action. And that it tags on to what I was saying earlier about we must be careful not chasing investors away. One can adopt the sustainability mechanisms without making it a red tape burden for aquaculture. And I think one of the ways of doing that is to make sure that the rules from one country to the next country in SADC, I'm not saying they have to be exactly the same, but if we have one set of rules to play by, then the game becomes a lot easier. And investors become confident if they know what those rules are. So that's certainly one step in the right direction. Thanks, Motseki.
Thank you, Etienne. Dr. Madala.
Yes, thank you. I think so far so good. There's so many things to do for aquaculture. I like the value chain approach that at least we should be able to touch each and every node in the value chain. I think we also need to stress on the best management practices, as we've said. And I'm seeing weaknesses in our aquaculture extension services across the block. We really need to strengthen aquaculture extension services. You see a lot of enthusiasm of our people to get into aquaculture, but they don't really get the anticipated results because of not getting the key or rather the basics of fish farming. So I think these are issues which you need to look at. Also, echoing aspects of environment, aspects of biosecurity, disease management, as well as the legal and a policy framework. I would like to concur with Tom that it's very unfortunate that fish farming is treated different from livestock keeping. You find someone can easily start a poultry enterprise, but when it comes to fish farming, you have a host of conditions. And I think this is, at some point, there was a wrong perception about aquaculture. We need to engage also with our colleagues, particularly in government bodies which deal with the environmental management issues, to find a way of loosening a bit when it comes to the aspects of environmental impact assessment, which on our side, we see it as one of a big hurdle for people who want to get into fish farming, particularly using these public water bodies like lakes and other big water bodies. So those are issues which I think we need to start. But what I'm happy is now aquaculture is almost a household name in most of SADC countries, and people are hearing. Our top leaders are starting to pay attention. So over time, things are going to change, and I believe our region could be one of the biggest producers of aquaculture products in the very near future. Eboseki?
Thank you, Dr. Madala. One last question. I think it's a comment more than a question to the panelists. It's from an anonymous attendee. He says, or she says, it will be useful to also review opportunities and challenges, not only the production side, but also the demand aspect, consumer perceptions and markets, so that we are able to promote the consumption of aquatic products, especially from aquaculture. Thanks for the comment. I'm sure in the next webinar, it will be further elaborated and discussed. Are there any parting shots from the panelists, starting with Jim?
I just want to say thanks to everyone. I think there's some exciting developments on the way, and I think, yeah, well done to SADC for initiating this work, and thanks to all the participants.
Thank you, Jim. Prof. Tom?
Yes, on my side, thank you very much to everybody. I really appreciate the participation that has come about it. I was just reading a number of the comments and a number of the questions, and these are wonderful. And I really appreciate the effort that has gone into providing us with these comments. And I will certainly be in touch with a number of the participants to get finer detail, such that one can incorporate it into our final document. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And obviously, I say thank you very much to Dr. Madala and to you, Motseki, and the people that have managed to put this all together, that it works smoothly. I was really worried at the beginning. You know, I'm quite old, and this new technology is something else. And yeah, well, you guys did a fantastic job. So thank you very much to all the technical people that helped us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Before I give to Dr. Madala to close for us, I have a colleague and a partner from African Development Bank who would like to say a word. Can we promote, give Dr. Ahmed Khan a platform to say? Ahmed, you're on.
Yes, please. Thanks, Motseki, for having this much needed webinar, and also to the partners Advance Africa for bringing such an important theme to all of us. As a bank, we have the Blue Economy Flagship, which caters to some of these initiatives. And we are very happy always to see our partners leading in terms of knowledge sharing, but also providing a platform for broader engagement. So it's very welcoming on our side, on my side specifically. My comment or question that I had, which I thought it might be too late, but maybe we can consider it in the next couple of sessions, is more so to deal with fiscal tools, specifically incentives. To what extent do we have incentives, fiscal, market-based, prioritized for SMEs specifically, because they are very dominant within the aquaculture value chains, but as well as to bigger farms in the private sector to scale out production and productivity. I noticed that in one of the charts, in one of the quadrants, we had PPPs as one of those on the bottom right. So it seems as if the role of the private sector, especially with partnership with government, could be a tool to scale out production. So as we move on in the next sessions, I will be happy to hear more about fiscal incentives, partnerships, as well as what could be the role of the bank in terms of its lending program, but also in terms of providing dialogue and policy support to some of these enterprise developments. Thanks again for having this wonderful session. Today is just a start to 2 more to come. I look forward to hearing much more on some of the brilliant ideas that is coming from the South. And I also look forward to some answers to how we could work together in terms of aligning fiscal tools to make sure that we support our regional member countries who have shown a lot of interest in this particular sector. So thank you again, Moseki.
Thanks, Ahmed. I'm sure we might even consider having the 4th webinar, where now, after we've identified the regional opportunities, we can try to match them with what the bank can offer. I'm sure that will work. Eh?
Indeed, we'll be very happy to see what the requests are and to what extent we can work together on a regional portfolio development. Thank you again.
Okay, we will discuss this offline between you and me.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Mandala, your parting thoughts.
Yeah, thank you to all our presenters, Tom and Jim, and Moseki, and the whole SADC team for putting up these wonderful webinar sessions. You know, this is amazing that would have been just a few people in one small room, maybe somewhere in Haberon. But the presentation now is open to each and every one in the block. And as you can see, we have managed to get quite a lot of the contributions. So we really support this. And it is my plea that if we can also initiate these kinds of webinar sessions at country level to engage with the grassroots stakeholders, it will also give us a very big boost in promoting aquaculture in the right direction. I would also like to thank all the participants for setting aside time to participate and their valuable contribution. This is only the beginning. You should remember we have 2 more sessions, maybe 3. There is one on the 17th, and then another one on the 24th, if I'm not mistaken. So please, let's come out in numbers. We like more and more people to join in so that we can all be able to share ideas for furthering aquaculture industry in our region. A lot of greetings from URT, from our minister and our permanent secretary. They are supporting and they are commending these efforts of being able to engage despite the challenge of COVID, but we have managed to keep the flame going on. Thank you very much. Back to you, Moseki.
Thank you very much. Let me also take this opportunity to thank everybody for your time, for participating. Thanks to our partners, Advance Africa, WWF, thank you for the technical support, as well as FAO and other partners who are in the house. I'm not going to mention everybody, but I would like to thank my colleagues at SADC Secretariat. I saw Deborah there and Panduleni. They also have been supporting this work, and thanks to them. More important is Kalicious Tutalife, who is the Senior Program Officer for Value Chains. And he's been helping us to, put aquaculture into the priority list for regional value chains. And he's a huge supporter of aquaculture and fisheries in general. And with him, we are going to make sure that aquaculture in the region become one of the priority value chains that are thoroughly promoted and sustainably so. So thanks to Kalicious, he has made funds available for this work through his budget lines. and is also trying to help us link up with EU funding and other available funding under the industrialization strategy. So big ups to him, and we're looking forward to a more fruitful collaboration with him and with our partners. Next week's webinar will start at 11 instead of 2 o'clock because we are accommodating our partners FAO. For those of you who had planned to go to coffee, you will know that next week it will be the week where you'll all be in Rome. But unfortunately, COVID-19 happened. And now there are several dialogues planned for next week to unpack some of the key issues which we are going to discuss at coffee. So on Friday at 2 o'clock, I think there will be a webinar by FAO. So to avoid clashes, we will have ours at 11. Thank you very much. God bless. Stay safe, sanitize, observe social distancing. Together we will win the fight against COVID-19. God bless. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moteki. Hello, Moteki. Hello. Yes.
How are you?
Good, good. We still.
Thank you very much.